I am Anna BARBANTI from WWF Mediterranean. I am the regional coordinator for marine protected areas, and I'll be your moderator. And Carlotta Bianchi for WWF Italy has very kindly accepted to be our rapporteur for today. So this session falls into the wider context of the 30 by 30 goal that we have set for ourselves, not only in the Mediterranean, but worldwide. And last year, WWF began a collaboration with the CNR France, CRIOB, the EcoPath International Initiative, and the Institute for Marine Science, the SIC of Spain, to understand which were the best scenarios to recover biodiversity and rebuild fish stocks in the Mediterranean. So as we well know, the Mediterranean is in a crisis. Our biodiversity and ecosystems are in decline, but at the moment, only 1.27 of the Mediterranean surface is actually protected by marine protected areas that have a management plan that is implemented on site. So before going on, I would like to show you a video that we made, which summarizes the study and gives a bit of background. Okay, so from this study that I mentioned before, what came out was that although we already know that the situation in the Mediterranean in matters of protection is not enough to achieve the 30 by 30 target, this was the first scientific proof that what we were thinking was actually what is happening. And on top of that, we understood that we need more areas to be protected, and that they need to be fully or highly protected areas. And but the thing is that this study also highlighted that if these areas are chosen randomly, we will not achieve our target. So they have to be chosen in a way that makes sense, that it actually achieves the protection that we want. So to do this, this study looked at many different scenarios that were based on previous scientific analysis and general knowledge and local knowledge of people, governments, and local stakeholders, and tried to overlap them with the potential new highly and fully protected areas, sorry, that we would like to place, to understand where these areas should go and also how much of the Mediterranean Sea they would protect in order to protect the 30% of all biodiversity and ecosystems that are threatened. And these are the 4 scenarios that gave the best benefit for the Mediterranean based on ecological or biologically significant areas, consensus areas, essential fish habitats, and spatial optimization. And as we can see from these graphs, there is an increase in the recovery of some of these species, namely not only predatory species and key species for our biodiversity, but also species that are important for on a commercial point of view. And here we can see that if we go from left to right, which is left the status quo, to the different scenarios that we have seen before, overlapped with fully and highly protected areas, there is an increase that is clear from these graphs. If we concentrate then on the Western Mediterranean Sea, only because this is the part where we have the majority of data, this increase is even more pronounced. And in fact, if we take these two commercial species like the grouper and European hake, they have a recovery up to 50 and up to 90% following the scenarios that I've shown before. So the WWF calls to action to expand and the coverage of MPAs and OECMs to protect hotspots that are important for marine biodiversity, to increase the fish catches and recover fish stocks, to include MPAs and OECMs inside implemented management plans and make sure they are combined with fully and highly protected areas. And that all this that we are doing is done by considering socioeconomic impacts and employing just and fair financial instruments. Because one of the points of this study was also that recognizing fundamental need to protect human rights of those that depend upon the marine resources, we can achieve an effective conservation for marine biodiversity. So this session falls into the strategic objective 2 of the roadmap, which is strengthen national legislation and ensure effective enforcement mechanism to produce better outcomes for MPAs. And the relevant recommendations are 2.1, 3.3, and 1.2. I know that the last two are not inside the second objective, but they are related to the 30 by 30 objective because it's a kind of, I think, a cross section. As I said, we have a rapporteur that will pick up the relevant roadmap recommendation, the actions needed, suggestions, and partnership needed for the implementation. And the two case studies that will be presented by Mozo Pran for WWF Adria, Croatia, and then Peter MACKELWORTH from the Marine Institute of Croatia. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mozer, which will present the first case study.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see the screen. It's actually a couple of case studies. One comes from Croatia, one comes from Italy. I have just 10 minutes, so I need to be brief, but it's the case studies we have been working on in Croatia for 4 years now, and in Italy for almost 2 years. The recommendations that these case studies are leading to are highlighted here. So it's bridging the gap between local field actions and high-level policy-making processes towards decentralized governance systems, towards increase the number and coverage of MPAs, and towards initiatives to strengthen MPA and stakeholder engagement. The first case study is about MPA Telaščica in Croatia. So the knot that we were trying to untie here is that Telaščica is the Croatian MPA that didn't have a fisheries management plan for a while now. There was a status quo since 2013, and we started working in 2017. The issue was classical. We had a paper park where there was no reserve effect. It was the monitoring showed that the fish stocks were more or less the same inside and outside the marine protected area. So in 2017, WWF started working with with public institution for management of this MPA and with the local fishers, but also national administration to start a co-management initiative. The thing is that co-management of fisheries does not have a legal background in Croatia. So what we started to do was completely voluntary. We called it an open door co-management, where we invited all the stakeholders to come in, but we could not force anyone and didn't want to force anyone to participate. And basically what happens is that we establish this kind of unofficial co-management committee that was joined by local fishers, by the MPA administration, and by national administration from two ministries. One was from Ministry of Agriculture, Directorate of Fisheries, and the other was from Ministry of Environment. And we were working this on a number of levels. One was the local level, trying to convince the local fishers to support additional fisheries measures, and the other level was negotiating directly with Directorate of Fisheries, because Directorate of Fisheries had the power to make any measures that we agree with fishers legally binding. And so we did the co-management action plan with fishers in 2018, and this action plan was not just on fishery management planning, but also on a number of other things. The thing is, you cannot just come in and take something away from fishers. Then you are considered an enemy immediately. So we did this hybrid approach, where we sat down, we turned the tables, and we told them, look, let's pretend that we are sitting on the same side of the table, and let us hear all the problems that you have, not just connected to fisheries, but in general to even to logistics, to the way of life, to community issues, and so on. And we created this problem solution matrix that identified most of these problems and solutions that we can work together towards. And we managed to negotiate. With this, we kind of bought them. Most of them were aboard, and so we created this fisheries management plan, a draft of fisheries management plan in 2019, but also we created a number of other activities that we were going to work together, like development of the market, branding, and so on. And then for a year or even more than a year, we tried to negotiate this with other actors on a higher level, the ones that had the power to actually make this a legally binding document. And exactly a year ago, in November 2020, a rule book on fisheries in marine protected areas was issued, and we finally managed to break this status quo that was there since 2013. And the result was that we got, among other things, we got the no-take zones in Telaščica marine protected area that were actually supported by the fishers. On the other side of the Adriatic, in Italy, in parallel with this, our colleagues from WWF Italy were working on a similar thing in a Torre Guaceto MPA. I think most of the people working on MPAs know the Torre Guaceto story. I joked with my colleague Claudia on this, that it would be a great thing if we would stop mentioning Torre Guaceto, because that would mean that finally we also have another successful examples of effective marine protected areas. The story of Torre Guaceto, in short, it's a small protected area where the only 6 fishing boats are allowed to fish inside the MPA, and fishers are engaged in MPA management. So what happened over the last 2 years? The MPA, but with the support from the local fishers, asked to extend the boundaries, and this is what we are working on right now. So it's quite a big increase. It's from 2,200 hectares to 6,200 hectares, so almost 3 times as big. And the thing is, this is not only supported by the fishers that are already allowed to fish in the MPA as it is now. It's supported from the fishers along the coastline. The bottom line is after a number of years, the fishers outside of the MPA, of this MPA, also recognize the benefits of the MPA for their own livelihoods. In short, as I said, fishers state their willingness to identify and create new no-take zones. So we have this on the western side of the Adriatic, and we managed to do this in the eastern side of the Adriatic. The argument against this is, and a number of people told me this, that this is too small. These are just pilots, and I have to agree with them. In the next phase, we need to step up and start popping these no-take zones and increase protection when it comes to fisheries measures everywhere. If we are to reach 30%. Lessons learned. Poof. Where can I start? I mean, working on co-management with fishers over the last 4 years made us all that participate in this experts on human relationships before everything else, I would say. And trust building is essential to co-management process. It's the foundation of the co-management process. And this is not something that you can do overnight. The donors of our project asked us at one point why we have so many meetings with fishers. But we said, we joked, basically we are dating fishers. In order to build trust, you need to build a relationship. And sometimes this is really challenging. But it's in the end, it's worthwhile. It takes time. It takes understanding of problems, of resources, organizations. It takes dedication. The lesson we have learned: don't give any false promises. Actually, the best thing is not to give any promises. And of course, it's not only about the looking how to manage fisheries. It's also to try and look how to lower the fishing effort. We call this $1 million question: how to lower the fishing effort while not reducing the income of fisheries. If you are just there to introduce no-take zones, fishers will see this as taking something away from them. We always say, yeah, but in the long run, these no-take zones are going to provide more fish for you guys to fish. But this is the long run, and they have to support the families also tomorrow and over the years until the no-take zone starts to provide. So we had to look for local heroes to build alliances. We had to provide some good examples like fishing tourism. This is something that we worked on to give them livelihoods while we were taking something away, and we need to take something away to lower the fishing effort. And in the end, when the successful co-management is already in place for some years, then the way towards sustainable fishing measures, it's much more easier, because then it's not coming from you, it's coming from the fishers themselves. Also, it's not part of this case study, but Jabuka or Pomo pit in the Adriatic showed the same thing. After fishers saw what the no-take zone was providing, they started asking for more. Coming back to recommendations, we already mentioned this in the beginning, and the actions that we took, basically, we started with the establishment of co-management committees. This was completely voluntary, and this also creates some issues, but then we don't have a legal background to do this, not in Croatia, not in Italy. But now, after we have the support of the administration, and after we have some initial successes, we have the support also of the administration to start and build the legal case for co-management. This is what we are actually doing now, both in Croatia and in Italy. The indicators to look for, well. The obvious one is the existence of co-management scheme, the involvement of stakeholders in co-management committees, from fishers to national administration, and also scientists play a big role here, because the monitoring should be done by them together with fishers. Then existence of fishery management plans and management measures that are built to co-management, and also the offset of the established programs. So taking away something with fishery management plans from fishers, but giving something back to these offset programs like fishing tourism, working on secondary productive fisheries, supporting them in in getting the funds from European maritime and fishery funds, for example. Partnerships are a crucial part of co-management because it is a partnership obligatory scheme. You don't have co-management if you don't have partnerships involved. And for us, for fisheries, this is National Fishery Administration, National Environment Protection Administration, if we are talking about marine protected areas, scientific institutions, fishery organizations, and then us as the civil society organizations. Okay, I try to be brief. I'm here if there are any questions, and also my colleagues from WWF Italy are also present. They can answer the questions in regard to their case study. Thank you very much, and I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Okay, thank you, Mozart. It was a great presentation. I would ask you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation so that then we can directly dive into the discussion. And so I would like Peter to come up the stage and present the second case study.
Okay. Escape the mask. Yeah, this is an ongoing project as part of the MBPC, which is the Mediterranean Biodiversity Protection Community, not the most catchy of names for a project, but it's actually pretty effective. I'm working as part of the Marine Institute in Croatia and working on particularly looking at the Southern Adriatic Ionian Strait EBSA and how we could move that EBSA from its current status as just as recognized as pretty important for biodiversity to something along the lines of some form of governance. In addition to this is then to provide a framework that could be used for other EBSAs, not only in the Mediterranean, but potentially also worldwide. So yesterday there was a lot of people talking about timing. It's the time, a very nice paper came out last year from a guy called Jean-Baptiste Geoffrey. He's from the Stockholm Resilience Center, talking about the blue acceleration, the movement of everybody into marine space, the explicit growth of sectors, particularly looking at how do we move further and further offshore. From 1985, there's a paper that talks about conservation as a crisis discipline. It's a crisis. And in crisis, one must act before knowing all the facts. Crisis disciplines require a mix of science, art, and their pursuit requires intuition as well. Tolerating uncertainty is often necessary. So we're now at this point in time where the blue acceleration, we're looking at moving from not only territorial seas to exclusive economic zones to the ABNJ. As part of this, we should be looking from a conservation perspective to move away from maritime policy to marine policy. Looking at, instead of maritime spatial planning, looking at marine spatial planning and changing the focus, working on the basis that actually the integrity of the environment is the essential part of blue growth. So we been looking a long time at the EBSAs. This is the original, one of the original drawings that I found, very kindly given to me by Giuseppe Bartolo, and it was recognized in 2014 special place that there's special places in the world's oceans. This is something we worked on a while ago. Giuseppe might remember this back in Santorini. This is with Michele. This is also, I think, part of the presentation that Anna just gave, looking at prioritization of areas within the Mediterranean. And one of the outputs of this was actually we can identify 10% of the Med, which is consistently identified, and 20% that is identified by at least 5 of these initiatives. This was back in 2013, so we should be much further along by now. One of the things that came out is that the obvious thing is that the governance area, the governance framework that exists is recognized by the states already, is the EBSAs. One of the things that we should be absolutely aware of is that EBSAs are not MPAs. They're not even OECMs, okay? They are opportunities for us to prioritize conservation, okay, within transboundary MSP. Not within national, but within transboundary. So this makes the governance of these areas extremely complex, especially considering some of these areas will have inland waters, some of them will have territorial seas, some of them will have exclusive economic zones, and some of them will have ABNJ, okay? So we took a look at the Southern Adriatic Ionian Strait EBSA, and these are the criteria. Everything's high apart from a couple of mediums, but we expect this because we actually wrote it. So, but what is interesting is you can actually see on the map, not very clearly, but there are several jurisdictions within that area, including the fact that the EBSA moves all the way to the Albanian coast. And this includes the recent MPAs that were designated there. So when we look at an EBSA, the EBSAs don't have strict boundaries. Those boundaries are indicative. But what they do provide is they provide an option for us to look at how would we spatially plan those areas, particularly putting conservation as a priority. Thinking about uncertainty, do we have enough data? We do. We have data on numerous parts of the environment, but these are two examples that from one of my colleagues from Caterina Fortuna that looks at Tertius truncatus on the left-hand side and looks at Caretta on the right-hand side. And these are data that come from aerial surveys in 2010 and 2013. And since then, we've had ACOBAM surveys and numerous other surveys. So we have plenty of data that backs up our EBSA designation, let's say. Not, let me pull that back. It's not an EBSA designation, it's EBSA recognition. So the main challenges that we saw when we were talking about how could we move the Southern Adriatic Ionian Strait, the SACE EBSA, how could we move the SACE EBSA forward, particularly looking at governance? But the one issue, uncertainty. Uncertainty is absolutely clear. It's an offshore area, not with massive amounts of data, but is fairly consistently identified as important. What about the governance and the jurisdictions? That's another issue. How do we move forward with those? What is the potential role of the regional seas program? What does SPARAC do in that region? What does RACSPA do? Sorry, SPARAC and PAPRAC, sorry. I get confused because I keep changing the names. And what are the mandates? You know, what are the statutory powers potentially? What could the other organizations within the region, for instance, the macro-regional strategies or agreements, what role could they have? And what lessons could be drawn from other transboundary arrangements? So we took a look at two, the Coral Triangle Initiative and the Wadden Sea Initiative. What was clear is it's complex, but what was also clear is buy-in from the states and recognition of the importance of the resource base was absolutely important. True collaboration would require open discussion with stakeholders and industries about resources, development plans, and conservation. This is fairly consistent from small-scale MPAs to large-scale MPAs worldwide. From the Wadden Sea and from the CTI, 4 clear lessons came out of them. One, we need to create a unique foundational agreement between the political groups and look at a political accountability, establish a robust institutional setting, including a permanent joint secretariat, look at creating a unique policy and management framework with common principles, targets, and work programs, and look at the development of systematic knowledge base, making sure that everything is evidence-based or scientific-based. So the question was, is there the capacity within the Adriatic to develop such cooperation? And this started a technical workshop in 2019, May 2019, and we saw there's multiple levels of governance, multiple initiatives that are interested in working in the area. So having looked at that technical side, we started to look at what could we do? Is there an interest from the international groups to engage with this? So we hosted another workshop in July 2021. It was supposed to happen in 2020, but of course, COVID intervened. And this was moderated by Jens Ennemark, who's the former secretary of the WWF Secretariat. And so one of the questions we were asking is, can we integrate ecosystem-based management, maritime spatial planning, area-based conservation principles into some kind of maritime spatial plan for the Adriatic-Ionian region? And during this meeting, we also had representatives from SPARAC and we had representatives from the EUS Air, and both of whom provided informal commitments of interest. So, okay, Barcelona Convention. This is an old slide, excuse me. But basically the Barcelona Convention is the relevant biodiversity tool to be used in the area. And when you look at the EUS Air, which is the macro-regional strategy covering the 8 different countries, EU and non-EU countries, you have a fundamental link within the EUS Air, looking at the 4 different pillars where MSP is a cross-cutting issue. So what we have is we identified 2 major factors. How do we reinforce the government's arrangements in place? Okay, create a clear link between legislation and policy. What was fundamental was the support of intergovernmental organizations in this, and the recognition that the environment is the base on which all growth and transportation and tourism resides. The creation of a science-based information with a dedicated transboundary network of researchers. Oh, okay, I'm afraid that's the wrong slide, but we'll just briefly move. So what we've got to a point now where we had the informal agreement with SPARAC, and we had the informal agreement with EUS Air. And then one of our partners, the Ministry of Environment from Montenegro, officially reached out to SPARAC to ask them to become formally involved in the process. They've agreed. There's a meeting this week. And as part of this, we developed a framework. This framework is looking solidly at the governance. How do we move the governance forward? How do we develop an apolitical information base that can feed into the governance principles within the area? So basically, we've got to a point now where this will be presented in Antalya, thank you. I always pronounce it wrong, by Dania, who's part of the MBPC program. This will be presented as a side event in Turkey. And we have this framework for moving forward. So next month we have a meeting with the EUS Air focal points. So hopefully we'll also get their buy-in. I don't see that we won't, having had informal discussions with them. So when I look back at the roadmap, there are some obvious links between the EBSAs and transboundary maritime or marine spatial planning. What we have is we have an opportunity at this point in time because EU countries, some, not all, are defining their MSP on a national level, at least to the territorial sea. Very few have gone beyond. If you want to go beyond, then we're starting to look at the EBSA areas in particular. So when we look at the recommendations, can we increase the number and coverage of MPAs based on scientific data and community engagement? Depends in this case study, how you determine the community. I would tend to determine the community as a stakeholder groups, which would be, when you're looking at the offshore area, you're looking at industries, oil and gas, shipping, fishery, potentially tourism. So all of these major stakeholders need to be engaged in the process. We're very, very early in this process, so I don't expect that that's going to happen until 2022 or even beyond. recommendations: ensure the legal and institutional reforms. I've kind of cut little bits that don't apply in this instance, as a political priority for the resilience of nature. It's going to be very difficult, but the attempt is to get the buy-in from the different states to identify the fact that these areas are important. Once you have those that buy-in, then you have the option to develop a kind of bespoke governance arrangement. Just one last slide, I think, if it's there. I'm sorry, I made some different changes this morning to it. Aha! Just leave you with this last thought. 321 EBSAs in the world. At the moment, none of them have any governance arrangements. So if we could get one right in the Adriatic, in the Mediterranean, we could truly be a microcosm for the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep the microphone because they might ask you questions. Okay, so thank you very much, Peter, for your beautiful presentation. And I would like now to open the floor for questions to, oh, we already have one.
Good morning. My name is Pepa Mengual from the Spanish National Park Network. And thank you for your presentation. But sincerely, I don't see the need to begin the process of conversion of EBSA into a protected area through a transboundary procedure. I think it would be, at least in the case of the Mediterranean, more easygoing to adopt a national strategy, as long as the countries involved, Italy, Albania, Croatia, etc., have their EEC zones already declared. I mean, we have in Spain the example of the cetacean corridor, which is more or less roughly what you are proposing, and it has been a national initiative, which is much more straightforward. So why, my question would be, why are you proposing a transnational strategy, which have been shown, for example, in Pelagos, which is quite difficult to adopt and also to manage the already declared protected area? Thank you.
Yeah, well, the EBSAs have been declared. This EBSA and the ones in the Adriatic have a lot of migratory species within them. Well, not mass, let me rephrase that, not migratory, but wide-ranging. So they're species that move between the national boundaries. I don't really know, I know about the corridor, but I don't really know the backgrounds of it all. But what I can tell you within the Adriatic is that anything that you manage on one side needs to be consistent on the other. So when we spoke about developing a transboundary MSP, it actually fits very nicely in with the macro-regional strategy that exists within the region. The 4 pillars are environment, transportation, blue growth, tourism. And all of these are being discussed at a macro-regional level. So that's the Adriatic and Ionian regions. So when we discussed this with the EUSA, the macro-regional strategy, they showed a lot of interest in this. Also, the other problem that we have within those areas, within the EBSAs, is that some areas, okay, not between the east and the west, but on the eastern side, are disputed. So one of the things that we were looking at is how could we look at an apolitical means to not affect jurisdiction or the state rights, so no ocean grabbing such, but look at how we would integrate the development of different policies, particularly at macro-regional level. In that, that's why we went with the macro-regional level, and because the EBSA covers, to try and get each state to individually put an MSP that. So the other thing I would say is we're not looking at a SPAMI here. We're looking at maritime spatial planning, which is different. So, but what we can have within those areas is we can have some kind of biodiversity priority, okay? So that's what we're particularly looking at. So we're looking more at the spatial planning at a transboundary level than a protected area at national level. That's why. And I think it's mainly due to the governance structure that is available now. and the fact that the connectivity between the two countries, between the countries there, because the distance between the states is 60 kilometers, something at the narrowest point. So,
any other?
Can I speak in French? For you. But I try to speak in English.
okay, I have.
Okay. It will be more easy for me. Okay. Je voudrais demander dans cette approche et dans ces recommandations, comment est-ce que les scientifiques et les chercheurs peuvent être plus impliqués et collaborer plus avec les co-managers des MPI et rendre plus facile toutes les études, les recherches et les résultats de ces études accessibles aussi bien pour les co-managers que pour les communautés. Parce que parfois, on sent que tous ces travaux scientifiques, toutes ces recherches, toutes ces données très intéressantes, elles n'arrivent pas vraiment au bon moment et aux personnes bénéficiaires.
Unfortunately, there was a slide missing. And the slide actually refers to the science policy interface. So yes, one of the things that we outline in the framework is the importance of apolitical and open science within the area and the transmission of that science to policymakers. The EBSA is offshore areas are a little bit unusual or different from coastal MPAs in the fact that when you talk about stakeholders, invariably they're the big industries. And one of the things that we are bringing is we're bringing in specialists such as Jean-Baptiste Jouffret from Stockholm, who's done a lot of work with the fisheries. So we're bringing in people who've worked with industries at that very, very high level, because it will take that kind of commitment. I always say you can get a politician on board, but after 4 years, that politician is gone. If you get the CEO of one of the big companies on board, he has all the telephone numbers of all the prime ministers within that region anyway, and he's invariably there for 10, 12, 20 years. So it's almost more important, I think, as conservationists, that we engage with the industries, particularly at a high level, if we can get there. It's not so easy, but rather than actually talking to politicians, because at the end of the day, you get more work done if a large company as a stakeholder buys into a program, you're more likely to get that moving forward than you are if you go to a politician. A politician will say, go speak to the stakeholder, or go speak to this industry. So I always think that in some ways, particularly when we're looking at large areas where we're looking at, potentially where sectors are, major industrial sectors are using these areas, that it's almost more important to get industrial buy-in than political buy-in. I think once you get the industry, you'll get the politicians anyway.
Is there any other questions for Peter or for Moser as well?
Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Very interesting. There is you mentioned the Core Triangle Initiative as a possible model, and then the Wadden Sea as well. I was thinking of the Sargasso Sea Alliance. I think it's a very interesting also kind of model, maybe more flexible than the others. So what do you think of the difference, and what could bring in the discussion such a device as the Sargasso Sea Alliance in the Mediterranean? Well, for the area you've been talking about, and then for the whole Mediterranean basin or sub-basins.
there are multiple models out there. For instance, there's the OSPAR work done with the Charlie Gibbs fracture zone in the Northern Atlantic, which I'm familiar with. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the Sargasso Sea, so I can't really comment on it. But what I can say is that there are multiple examples where particularly through individuals that have really pushed an agenda within an institution. For instance, I can think of David Johnson, who was chief of OSPAR at the time, who's now part of the Gobi initiative. Some of the work that he's done, combining fisheries with OSPAR, with the offshore fisheries, I can't remember exactly which group it is now, in the Atlantic, but also looking at being that consensus maker. And I think that's actually, when we talk about conservation, we need consensus makers in the room, those people who have institutional trust and the skills to bring people on board. It's very much what Mossa said about, it's about building trust and having credibility and sticking to your word, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Just what you said, I think we're going to have a big problem probably in the future in the Mediterranean regarding the extension of the exclusive economic zone. For the moment, well, we are in a kind of a status quo, but certainly, international waters going to shrink to a point that, well, everything is going to be over the whole Mediterranean is going to be transboundary. So I think more than ever, it is extremely important to think about it and forms of, say, alliance or share governance of the Mediterranean in the future.
Yeah, I had a very similar conversation with David a couple of years ago about, there's a phrase they use, I can't remember what it is. So this area, transboundary between countries is one thing. Then you have the transboundary between the country and the ABNJ. So you always have this kind of this mix of how this is going to be undertaken. And my feeling always was, and I think it's coming through in the negotiations, that when we talk about biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, they're going to use the regional seas programs as the means to activate this at local or regional level. So I see that the UN is, these ongoing discussions is that the regional seas will have a massive role to play. I'm not sure we're all ready for that, but let's hope that with the help of all these people in here, we can also help advise them.
If there are, okay, one last question, and then we will try to move on.
Yes, Lea David from the COBAM Scientific Committee, and we are leading a process defining at the Mediterranean level the cetacean critical habitat. So this is one process. You are well known probably about the important marine mammal area. There's the upcoming important marine turtle area and so on. So my question is how we can help each others in showing countries that those areas really are interesting and have to be protected. How such process can be working together instead of being like sectorial based from each agreement or whatever.
And I think this is where the Adriatic has an advantage. The Adriatic Ionian region has an advantage. And I know that the West Sea is the Western Med is also talking about a macro-regional strategy. I think by bringing in a macro-regional strategy that has some, it's not only looking at conservation, it's looking at blue growth and all this. It depends on the strength of the pillar within the macro-regional strategy. So most macro-regional strategies that have blue growth or sustainable tourism or I don't know, whatever is considered to be priority for the region. And then you have at the far end, you have the environmental, the ecological integrity. And one of the things that I've been working with Caterina Fortuna and Draško and all these guys that we've been working with in the Adriatic one of my roles has been to try and engage with the USA and help to promote this pillar within the macro-regional strategy. And this is one of the initiatives we have. A couple of others that we're trying to then promote their kind of stature within the macro-regional strategy. And this is the way we see it, to try and push this agenda of moving from maritime to marine spatial planning, and the recognition that the resource base is everything. With regards to the turtles and cetaceans and important areas, these areas are important, but also we need to look at the base. We need to look at the fish stocks. We need to look at everything else, problems with invasive species. All of these fundamentally may affect, particularly in the future, the Adriatic being one of the susceptible areas for climate change. We need just to see how that might change the distribution patterns, whether then we need to look at, fortunately the EBSAs are not solid. They're not clearly defined boundaries and open to change. So it's one of those things that we can look at how that might change over a period of time, particularly with climate change. But yeah, the importance of these species, you also need to give them an economic reason, and that's tourism inevitably, and actually building. One of the fundamental things I think the macro-regional strategy does is it builds the Adriatic-Ionian identity. And something like this, being the first that has some kind of governance framework or structure, provides that as well, I think.
Okay, thanks. I think we have a question from online.
La question est en français. Comment évaluer l'effort de gestion d'une façon globale sur l'ensemble du réseau des AMP de Méditerranée et non pas par AMP seul? Et comment quantifier ça globalement? Y a-t-il des indicateurs propres à l'évaluation globale de l'effet réserve des AMP de Med? Si la personne qui a posé la question peut nous dire si c'est pour Peter ou pour Mother, ou pour une discussion générale.
Mother, you can answer this one.
Non, c'est pour l'ensemble de la présence.
Well, I do feel neglected, so I can jump in.
Yes, pour une réflexion globale avec toute la présence, bien sûr.
So do I take this one or?
Take
Yeah,
it,
go
take
ahead,
it.
Mother.
Okay, thank you. Well, if I understood the question correctly, the question was about how do we value the success or failure in the initiatives that we are working on. I think in general, if you are speaking of any kind of management in regards to marine or any other realm, we are coming back to monitoring. In our case, working on co-management in a number of places in the Mediterranean, one of the most important things when you are putting a co-management together is to have also scientists on board sitting at the table. The scientists are there to also direct discussion, to help us understand what kind of fishery measures would work or would not work, but also they are there to drive monitoring of the measures that are already implemented. So basically what we did or what we usually do or do most of the time is to have some kind of scientific monitoring that's following the initiatives that we are implementing. So for example, in the case study that I presented from Telaščica Nature Park or Marine Protected Area in Croatia, what we did when we started, we did a baseline monitoring. One was ecological monitoring, so we did the evaluation of the fish stocks in the marine protected area, also outside of the marine protected area, and then we repeated this in this year. This summer, we are still waiting for results, and then you compare the results, you see if there is any improvement. If there is an improvement, then great. That's a great job. You move forward with the measures that you are implementing. If there is no improvement, there is something that you are doing is wrong, or there are some other outside interferences that you need to identify and then adapt the management measures. It's as simple as that in theory. In practice, it's usually a bit different, but yes, the general answer would be you do the monitoring. And not only maybe ecological monitoring, we also do the social economic monitoring in parallel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Moser. And I would get the chance, since Moser is talking about monitoring, and the question was also about which are the indicators for this improvement, since this falls into the discussion that we are having regarding the roadmap. What do you think are the indicators that we should consider when we look at the recommendations, especially the first one that is related to this session, which is the expansions of MPA and OECMs to achieve the 30 by 30? Anyone?
I think what is one thing that should be considered in the development of indicators that is important, that is to ensure that the increase of area in whatever form it is, MPA or ECM, whatever, responds to specific objectives of conservation. Having clear which is the threat, which is the natural values of a place and the threat of those values make possible to make a clear monitoring of what is going on. But in many cases, the MPAs have been created because of opportunity. And then the relation of the effects of the MPA are not so clear because it are not clear what were the original natural values that push this MPA. So we really need to have clear objectives for conservation and clear threats for those values. And just one comment. And this is the common DISPAR strategy of evaluating what is going on in conservation.
Thank you. Well, I made the remark in other sessions already, but if you look at the recommendation for the moment, OECM, they are not there. So first of all, let's include the OECM in the recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just briefly respond?
Yeah, sure.
I agree. Fundamentally, we need to have the objectives, but we also need to be pragmatic. Conservation is also about working with uncertainty. Yeah, there are areas of the Mediterranean where you will never have enough data. You will never have enough data. No matter how many aerial surveys you do, how many bathymetries, how many oceanographic, there will always be the argumentation that it's not good enough. What is good enough and who defines what's good enough? And that's what I'm saying, is that you also need to be pragmatic in what using the tools that we have, using the information that we have to try and put something in. Because if we wait for the perfect MPA, we'll be waiting forever.
Sorry, I'm going to give you the floor in a second. I just wanted to ask, so what do you think one of these pragmatic indicators could look like, either at a local or transboundary level?
I think that's for you, Moser.
May I kindly ask you to repeat the question, please?
Right.
I was asking, since we were talking about pragmatic indicators for the evaluating and monitoring MPAs and the expansion and the sites for MPAs, which could be some of these pragmatic indicators, either at a local or transboundary level?
Well, I would say it depends what we are looking for, what the project is about, what you are trying to improve. If you are working with fishers on improving status of fish stocks, then obviously it's the either biomass of the fish, or if you're looking at certain species, then the quantity or the quality of the population of this species in the given area. If you are talking about some other habitats, like working on Posidonia or Coralligenous, then this should be it. If you are looking also on community perspective, improvement of livelihoods, then we are moving away from biological monitoring and we are going into social economical monitorings. What we did, for example, to bring you closer, when we started this work, it was also new for me what it means social economical monitoring. So we were looking into the value of catches of the fishers, and we were looking into how fishers perceive different things, how they perceive their place in the community, how they perceive their relationship with the marine protected area, with the national administration for fisheries, if we are talking outside of the protected area. So this is going to depend, as everything else, on what you are trying to improve. And then when you know what you want to improve, then you are looking for the best and usually the cheapest way to track this.
I mean, I think we cannot confound what is having data for a perfect monitoring, that having clear the natural values you want to protect in an MPA, to have clear objectives. Because all the roadmap is, well, the question of adequate management is around the roadmap. I mean, conceptually it has all the weight. But you cannot have an adequate management plan if you don't have clear objectives. It's not about data, it's about clear objectives. You have to be very clear about the natural values you want to preserve. Otherwise, you will be protecting what? And of course, I mean, uncertainty, we have to deal with uncertainty, that's for sure.
No, I agree. And yeah, there's been a slight miscommunication between our language, I think. I wasn't talking about pragmatic indicators. I was talking about being pragmatic with where we can put area-based management if we're looking at that. The problem always remains is that, you know, when you look at category 5 and 6 of the IUCN categories, you know, are these really protected areas when you look at it? 1A, 1B, 2, yeah, you can start to see that there is some conservation value, but are we then undermining the conservation value when we start to look at categories 5 and 6? Yeah, I mean, it's a balance, yeah, and you know, we can talk about I saw yesterday one of the slides that's all the protected areas within the Mediterranean. Then suddenly, in about 2014, there's an increase, and it's about the Croatian Natura 2000 sites. 12% of the territorial sea in Croatia is under Natura 2000. There are 6 sites for bottlenose dolphins. That's the reason there's 12% under. Is there any management board for any of them? No. Is there any management plan? No. Is there any effective governance? No. Does anybody know what to do with these sites? No. So, you know.
Yeah, just Jean-François Sis from IUCN France, and you were talking about IUCN management categories. There is for an indicator that could be useful to notice the levels we are on protection on the Mediterranean and on strictly protected areas. There is in Europe the definition of strictly protected areas that is going to come, and it might take into account the 4 first categories, the IUCN categories 1A and 2, and on some other level the 3 and 4th category. So that could be a good indicator to see at what level of protection we are. And the second one is, of course, the highly and fully protected areas of the MPA guide that is useful to see the percentage of protection that we have. And on the other level, on management effectiveness and quality of governance, we had this workshop this morning on SPAMIS and on IUCN green list. And there's going to be a work trying to connect the two, well, at least to see the different synergies that are between those two international tools, which are about evaluating the quality of management and improving the quality of management and governance. So that those are two international levels tools that are useful for these questions.
Yeah, OECMs are a fact that has come and will stay, that's clear. But I think we have to be very careful. Nobody knows exactly what our OECM is going to be. So I think we need to be extremely careful on the definition of OECMs and what is going to be OECMs and what is not going to be an OECM, particularly in the Mediterranean. And I would like to give you an example. GFCM has declared a few years ago the bottoms below 1,000 meters protected from trawling. That would mean that 45% of the Mediterranean is a FRA, declared by GFCM. And FRAs are one of the proposals to be included in OECMs. If we include that as a FRA, we have achieved more than 30% of the Mediterranean protected if we include OECMs in the definition. So, I mean, we are forced to be extremely careful in the definition of what is going to be OECMs, or if not, we are going completely to lose the focus on our target and on the proposals we have to make. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that when we talk about 30% of protection, it's probably not just on a surface level, but it's also on the amount of range of species and biodiversity of threatened species that you are protecting. So I agree in general, as a general rule, but as you said, I think when you mean 45%, I imagine you talk about coverage of 45% of the Mediterranean Sea, but that I don't know, I don't have the data, but I can imagine it doesn't comprise the 30% of the threatened biodiversity of the whole Mediterranean that would be protected, I imagine.
No, of course not. But I mean, at least as far as I know, when we are talking about 30% is surface area. Okay, the bottom is not the whole of the column of water, that's clear. But I mean, I was just trying to draw your attention on the fact that sure, we have to be careful. Right? It's a necessity to find a good definition of what is and what is not.
I mean, because this problem is already on the table. It's not a potential problem. It's a problem that is already on the table. And the best example, or the example I know better, is the Spanish corridor. I mean, the only measurement for the Spanish corridor is to prohibit till now is to prohibit oil prospections, and this because has a legal administrative figure of MPA is counting on the MPA area. Yes, I mean, a huge jump in the increase of MPAs in the Mediterranean is this area where there's only one measurement that responds to a threat that is a potential threat, because it's to avoid that it happened, because there has not been before or not intensively. So we have to be very careful on what we put in each box to interpret which is the real response of to the conservation of nature.
Thank you. There was behind you, please.
Yeah, just maybe one comment, just to what was said regarding the OECM and the example of the the ban of the bottom trawling and below 1,000 meters. I totally agree. I think one of the criteria could be, and as it's the same for the MPAs, a management plan, the existence of a management plan, and well, co-management plan, I would say, as it was presented, really with all the stakeholders. That could be a real criteria. And I take as an example, I was in the session with the presentation of the GFCM, also of the FRAs on the canyon, in the canyon area. And this, we know that this is a highly sensitive area. The canyons, there are several FRAs declared by the GFCM regarding, well, not all the canyons, but well, some areas in the Gulf of Lion, etc. And now they decided to develop a management plan, really. It's not just declaring that this is going to be a FRAs, but also with a management plan to sustain really the protection there. So I think that really makes sense and should be really seriously considered as an OECM to be included in the recommendation in that case.
Thank you. Anyone? I'll come for the microphone in a second. So the second thing I would like to draw your attention on is what are the actions that should be taken then to regarding the roadmap recommendations and the expansions of MPAs, and well, it's, as we said, it's not on the roadmap, but also OECMs once there is a proper legislation and a proper management of them. What are the actions that you believe should be taken? I think there's a microphone behind it.
Well, maybe surprisingly, I would propose, and I'm not sure if you're going to agree on that, but the promotion of the declaration of the economical exclusive zones of the countries, of the Mediterranean countries, which have not already declared them. Why? Because this will exclude areas beyond national jurisdiction from the Mediterranean waters. And for me, it's clear that areas, ABNGs, are a difficulty for conservation. So that would be a proposal.
I agree. The definition of the exclusive economic zone means that not only do you have the rights, but you have the responsibilities. And UNCLOS is absolutely clear. You have responsibilities within the exclusive economic zone, even if you have, let's say, overriding economic opportunities.
I mean, there has been before a comment from MACKELWORTH. Sorry, I cannot remember the name. So I think one proposal, one action should be on the line of combining natural conservation problems regarding pelagic species and really make an action on that line. I mean, you have mentioned the idea of the possibility of linking cetaceans and turtles in a common strategy, and I would strongly suggest to include fishes also. I mean, we had a similar conversation before in the other room, regarding that there is no any action regarding the pelagic community, considering the huge relevance of for example, with tunas in the Med, the ecological role that the tunas play is not considered in conservation, never. It's not even mentioned. So one action could be taken in this line of combining, I mean, finding the synergies in area-based management, pelagic, that is beneficial for tunas, turtles, and cetaceans.
Yeah, I would just in support of ACOBAMS. The ACOBAMS surveys have done really well because they not only look at cetaceans, but also sea turtles, seabirds, marine litter. I can't think of anything else. Yeah, basically anything that's out there. So I think it's good to have these synergies. I mean, we're looking now at the Northern Adriatic with regards to conservation plans offshore, because this area has been recognized as important for foraging for caretta and for the Tursiops as well. So, you know, I always believe that when we put in conservation plans, we need as many different arguments for conservation, including historical heritage sites, cultural heritage sites, all of these, putting all of these in and having a broad argumentation, I think is absolutely essential.
And I think including fish stocks, it's important also for the co-management with local fishermen and fisheries.
I mean, going one step further, I specifically would recommend a discussion between ACOBAMS and ICAT.
Thank you very much. I'm the Executive Secretary of ACOBAMS, just to thank for this comment. And actually, a deep work has been in developing with the Commission CGPM. So we are working together and making sure that there is capacity building at the level of the national parties of ACOBAMS in terms of making unwanted interactions between fisheries and cetaceans to tackle these issues and to develop measures that are compatible, I mean, with species conservation and with that the fisheries activities. So that's an ongoing work that is developing well, because it is CGPM which is responsible for management of fisheries in the Mediterranean. Of course, it is ICAT, the global framework in terms of tuna conservation. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'll go here. And then...
Thank you. I am Melina Marco from Cyprus. Actually, all these things are really good and well done and said, but they're focused on the species, on the pelagic species, on fishes, but also you can see marine protected areas in regards to habitats. And usually the offshore areas are quite deep. So therefore there is a further need. Some countries have already gone and done the mapping of the deep sea habitats, but others are very behind. And that is not only due to the capacity building, but also to financial constraints. So there is a need as well to have this financial means to be able to go to the deep sea and check the habitats as well that need protection. So in regards to that, I just wanted to mention that it's not just the species, but also the marine habitats. Thank you.
And I think this goes in line with then funding the partnership to make this happen, that I hope we'll be able to have time to talk about.
I think, Peter, you gave a very good example with the OSPAR convention, because for the first time we see a regional sea convention having an in the ABNG area, having the a marine protected area, the Gibbs fracture. So I think we could do the same in the Med under the Barcelona Convention. I think OSPAR is a very good example, and having, well, maybe linking with the ACOBAMS CCH mapping, having such a international in ABNG protected area would be an incentive maybe for collaboration, for more transboundary collaboration in regard to the maritime and maritime activities.
And following this line, what other partnership would be useful and important for the implementation of these actions? I'm sorry, we have only 5 minutes left. So if anyone would like to share their ideas.
Coming from a cetacean background, so forgive me, noise and disturbances also, so shipping, maritime traffic, because all of this is building in the Med. It's getting insane, and in the summer season, we have no control over personal watercraft. We have no knowledge. They don't have AIS. The only way you can get data or information on them is through land-based radar if you're good with the military. So you know, I think that disturbance and noise is such a massive issue that we're just waiting for it to happen.
But regarding your question, specific synergies, I'm responding to the issue of noise. The synergy should be through Mongoose, the Mediterranean network for the Oceano 7 system. That is the Mediterranean side of Eurogoose. This is the group, or this is the institution, key institution regarding observational oceanography in the Med.
Anybody else would like to comment? Okay.
I can also suggest as well, because, okay, from the noise and the cetacean background, I know in Greece, a lot of information comes from the Navy. So even the Navy can provide useful information in regards to these species. And because they are always out in the sea, they have pictures, video recording the GPS. And I know in Greece, they do that a lot. I don't know if there is a Greek representative here, but in Greece, yes. So the Navy is actually giving a lot of information for the specific species to the government for the protection of the marine environment. So maybe synergies with the navies, not only because it's not only the RACSPA or OSPAR or things like that, but even within the countries, you can have synergies that can provide you with information that they have and you don't know. So you can protect these species by having information coming from other sources.
Yes, for sure. At local level, it's also extremely important to have this information. Does anybody else know if in their own countries there is this possibility of a kind of partnership, as we just mentioned in Greece with the Navy or the military?
Yeah, we have an example in Croatia where we're using the heat maps from radar stations. So the radar stations identify, you know, small boats, particularly in the summer season, so you can see the hot spots of where tourists are whizzing by on 40 knots. It's helpful, but you know, it doesn't give you real-time data. You get it 6 months later. You know, there's a lot of negotiation. So yeah, it would be great to get that transparency from the armed services, but yeah, they have a role to play as well, I guess, not only in monitoring.
That's a long shot, maybe it's worth trying, we'll see. Okay, if nobody else has any more comments or would like to make an intervention, do we have anyone online that would like to speak? No? Okay, so I would like to thank you all for your participation and your comments and everything that has been shared today. And it will all be summarized for our roadmap to make it better and hopefully to also improve our conservation of our sea. So thank you, and I'll see you around.